Iturralde, the Cuban geologist, says that the only time that that part of the ocean could have been different enough geologically would have been 50,000 years ago.
For more than 25 years, the mysterious structures beneath the waters of Cuba have remained one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. Now, after years of silence, scientists are once again turning their attention to the site. But what could they have found at the Cuba Underwater Pyramids that kept the mystery alive for so long? And could this finally be the answer everyone has been waiting for? Join us in this video as we uncover the mystery found beneath Cuba's underwater pyramids, the mystery beneath Cuba's waters that no one could explain. For more than 25 years, one discovery beneath the Caribbean Sea has continued to disturb the small group of researchers who first witnessed it. In 2001, a marine survey team working near Cuba detected enormous geometric formations nearly 2,000 feet below the ocean surface. The sonar images revealed pyramid-like shapes and long, straight lines arranged with unusual and almost unnatural symmetry. Experts who examined the scans admitted that the site bore a striking resemblance to the remains of a lost city. But there was a major scientific problem. At that depth, the structures would have been underwater long before any known civilization is believed to have existed on Earth. Then, without explanation, the investigation slowly faded from public attention. Now, new scans of the same location reportedly show even larger and more complex formations, reopening one of the most unsettling underwater mysteries ever recorded. Some discoveries come after years of focused searching. Others appear completely by accident, without warning or expectation. In 2001, a routine marine mission in the waters off western Cuba suddenly became one of the most controversial underwater mysteries of modern times. What began as a simple operation to locate old shipwrecks ended with sonar images revealing something almost impossible: vast geometric structures resting deep beneath the ocean floor, arranged in patterns that looked uncannily similar to an ancient city. For a brief moment, the world was left with a single question: has someone finally discovered Atlantis? The discovery took place near Cuba's Guanahacabibes Peninsula, a remote and largely unexplored region at the western tip of the island, surrounded by deep Caribbean waters. A Canadian company called Advanced Digital Communications, ADC, was working in partnership with the Cuban government to scan the seafloor in search of Spanish shipwrecks. This type of mission was not unusual. For centuries, Spanish treasure fleets crossed the Caribbean carrying gold, silver, and priceless cargo back to Europe. Many of those ships never reached their destination. Hurricanes, reefs, pirates, and naval battles sent countless vessels to the bottom of the sea. Even finding a single wreck could uncover an extraordinary piece of history. To carry out the survey, ADC used side-scan sonar technology. This system works by sending sound waves across the ocean floor and creating detailed images of what lies beneath. In most cases, the results reveal natural formations, scattered debris, or the outlines of sunken ships. But during one particular scan, the team noticed something completely unexpected. The sonar images showed massive geometric structures spread across roughly 2 square kilometers of seabed. Large stone-like blocks appeared arranged in highly organized patterns. Some seemed stacked on top of one another, while others formed circular and linear shapes. Several structures rising from the ocean floor even resembled pyramids. The mission was led by marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky and her husband, Paul Weinsweig. Both were experienced professionals, known for their technical discipline rather than sensational claims. Even they were shocked by what appeared on the sonar screens. Weinsweig later described the formations as resembling megalithic structures similar to Stonehenge or Easter Island. At the time, reports suggested that some of these shapes could measure up to 400 meters wide and 40 meters high. These were not small or scattered fragments on the seabed. The structures appeared massive, structured, and deliberately arranged. Zalitsky described the site as something truly remarkable and suggested it could represent the remains of a large ancient urban center. However, she also issued a strong warning against jumping to conclusions. She emphasized that it would be scientifically irresponsible to make extraordinary claims without much stronger evidence. After so many years, the shocking discovery underwater off Cuba has left one major question. What kind of evidence led to something so unexpected being found deep beneath the ocean? Keep watching to find out. The Cuba discovery that vanished into silence. The discovery took place in Cuban territorial waters in 2001, during a period when the political relationship between Cuba and the United States was extremely tense and effectively frozen. The U.S. trade embargo against Cuba had already been in place for many years. Because of this, American researchers, American institutions, and American funding sources could not easily take part in any project operating in Cuban waters without entering a highly sensitive political environment. The company involved, ADC, was a Canadian-Cuban joint venture. They had an official agreement with the government of Fidel Castro to explore Cuban waters in search of shipwrecks. This agreement gave them legal access to the area, but it also placed them under intense political attention from multiple directions. Every move they made was carefully observed, closely monitored, and politically sensitive. When the discovery became international news, it immediately drew the kind of attention that makes governments cautious, careful, and defensive. The Cuban government showed interest in the findings, but a project of this magnitude, requiring deep-sea submersibles, international scientific teams, and massive financial backing, needed cooperation from institutions that were either politically restricted or extremely difficult to engage. Then came the issue of funding, which quickly became one of the biggest obstacles. Deep-sea exploration is extraordinarily expensive. The equipment required to properly investigate a site located at around 650 meters depth, not just sonar imaging, but full sample collection, high-resolution 3D mapping, and potential artifact recovery, costs millions of dollars. ADC was a private company with limited financial capacity. Zalitsky and Weinsweig reached out to various institutions, agencies, and government bodies for support, but most of that support never materialized. National Geographic was reportedly interested in the project, but ultimately, no full-scale expedition was ever launched. The Cuban government supported the idea in principle, but it did not have the resources to fund such a large and technically complex mission alone. At the same time, the wider international scientific community, naturally cautious, highly skeptical of extraordinary claims, and protective of its credibility, chose not to become involved in a project that could easily turn out to be nothing more than unusual geological formations. Then, gradually and almost imperceptibly, something began to happen. The story started to lose momentum and fade from attention. There was no official shutdown, no public rejection, and no single defining moment where it was declared false or confirmed. Instead, it simply disappeared over time under the combined pressure of politics, funding challenges, and scientific caution, slowly pulling attention away from a discovery that had once seemed destined to become global headline news. Zalitsky eventually stepped away from deep-sea exploration altogether. The original ADC data remained largely untouched, unprocessed, and mostly unexamined. And for nearly 2 decades, the pyramids, whatever they truly are, remained on the floor of the Caribbean Sea, silent and undisturbed. Zalitsky and Weinsweig gave interviews through 2003 and into 2004, continuing to express strong confidence in their discovery and optimism that future research would eventually provide clearer answers. After that period, however, the interviews stopped completely. DC, the company behind the discovery, also went quiet. Their website, which once contained detailed information about the Cuba project, was eventually removed from public access. Over time, Zalitsky and Weinsweig became increasingly difficult to contact. Manuel Iturralde Vinent, the Cuban scientist most closely associated with the project, continued his academic and scientific work, but he rarely, if ever, spoke publicly about the underwater structures again. International archaeological institutions declined to fund expeditions to the site, while major oceanographic organizations such as Woods Hole, Scripps, and National Marine Research Agencies did not include the Cuba site in their official research agendas. Within just a few years after the initial discovery, the Cuban underwater pyramids effectively vanished from serious scientific discussion. They were never officially disproven, nor were they clearly and definitively explained. Instead, they were quietly left behind and gradually forgotten within formal research circles. However, the original raw data still exists. A small group of independent researchers, working without funding and largely without recognition, continued to preserve and analyze it. They are the reason there is still anything new being said about it today. Beyond this discovery, is there a hidden myth behind it, or is everything based only on real evidence that has been uncovered? Stay tuned to find out more. The Lost Land, Bridge Theory, and the Mystery Beneath Cuba. Zalitsky herself suggested a theory that has largely been ignored in the more sensational coverage of this discovery. She proposed that the stone structures might actually be the remains of a local ancient culture that once lived on a land bridge, a long stretch of land, roughly 100 miles in length, that may have once connected Cuba to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula when sea levels were much lower than today. This is not a fringe idea. Geologists have suggested for many years that Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula may once have been connected by land in the distant past. And what makes this idea even more interesting is this. The Yucatan Peninsula is the home of the ancient Maya civilization. The Maya built pyramids. They built large cities. They also built circular astronomical observatories. They arranged huge stones with very high precision and careful planning. And the ancient Maya also kept powerful legends. Oral stories passed down from generation to generation speak of ancestors who once lived on an island in the Gulf of Mexico that was suddenly swallowed by the sea in a fast and catastrophic event. Manuel Iturralde also pointed this out very clearly. The Maya and other native Yucateco groups have stories of a lost homeland under the sea. Their ancestors, according to these stories, were survivors of an even older civilization that disappeared beneath the water. Now look at the timeline of early human movement in the Caribbean. Scientists who study ancient migration paths in the Americas believe that the earliest settlers of Cuba, a group known as the Casimiroid peoples, arrived from the Yucatan Peninsula around 4000 BC. That is about 6,000 years ago. And 6,000 years is also the same number that keeps appearing again and again in estimates for how old the Cuban underwater structures might be if they were built during a time when sea levels were lower, but still within the range of human history. Were there any challenges during this discovery, or did everything unfold as expected and lead directly to what was eventually found? Stay tuned for more. The difficulties that turned the Cuba discovery into a global mystery. One of the biggest and most difficult problems with the Cuba discovery is its depth. Here is what the scientific community understood by 2003, and what almost nobody outside that group fully understood at the time. The depth itself was the central issue, and it made the entire discovery both scientifically challenging and highly controversial. The structures are located about 600 to 750 meters below the current sea surface. Human beings do not build cities on the ocean floor. They build settlements where they can survive, where they can breathe air, grow food, access fresh water, and sustain life. For the Cuba site to have been created by human hands, it would have had to exist on dry land or in shallow coastal waters. This means that at some point in the past, this section of seafloor must have been at or above sea level. Now consider the basic scientific calculation. The last time global sea levels were significantly lower than today was during the last glacial maximum, the peak of the most recent ice age, roughly 20,000 to 26,000 years ago. During that period, massive ice sheets covered large parts of North America and Europe, trapping enormous amounts of water and causing global sea levels to drop by about 120 to 130 meters. But 130 meters is nowhere near 600 meters. It is not even close in scale. Even at the absolute lowest sea level point of the Ice Age, the Cuba site would still have been located hundreds of meters underwater. To place a city on that location at sea level, you would need to push its possible construction back to a time so extremely ancient that any civilization capable of building such a complex structure would exist far earlier than everything currently accepted in human history or archaeology. The second possible explanation is tectonic movement. Western Cuba lies within an active and complex tectonic zone. The Caribbean Plate, the North American Plate, and several smaller microplates constantly interact in shifting, unpredictable ways. Earthquakes do occur in the region, and the geology is dynamic. However, the scale of sinking required to move a landmass from sea level down to 600 meters below the ocean is enormous. It would require either a sudden catastrophic collapse or a very slow subsidence process over thousands of years, at rates far greater than anything documented in the geological history of the Caribbean region. Vinant himself acknowledged this difficulty. He pointed out that while unusual tectonic events are theoretically possible, there is no clear geological evidence in Western Cuba showing the kind of extreme and catastrophic sinking needed to explain the depth of the site. So the problem remains simple but unsolved. The site is too deep for explanations based on Ice Age sea levels, too deep for known tectonic processes, too deep for any timeline that fits within established human history. The Cuba discovery created a scientific contradiction that could not be easily resolved within existing knowledge frameworks. If the structures are man-made, they would suggest a version of human history that directly challenges what archaeology and geology currently accept about the Caribbean region. If the structures are natural, then they are simply unusual geological formations, interesting to specialists, but not significant enough to justify the massive cost and risk of deep ocean exploration. Faced with this difficult and uncomfortable choice, the scientific community did not fully commit to either explanation. It did not confirm the claim, and it did not completely reject it. Instead, it chose silence. After the discovery, did all scientists accept it, or did some of them question it and raise their own concerns? Keep watching to find out. The controversy beneath Cuba that science can't settle. Recently, conversations have started gaining momentum again on social media about a possible ancient sunken city off the coast of Cuba. This renewed interest has sparked intense debates about lost civilizations in the Caribbean region. Many users online are captivated by the idea of hidden history beneath the ocean, and some even draw possible connections to the legendary story of Atlantis. Speculation about the underwater site near Cuba continues to grow rapidly, even though there has been very little direct scientific investigation for many years. In 2001, marine engineers Paulina Zalitsky and Paul Weinsweig announced a highly intriguing discovery off the Guanahacabibes Peninsula. Using advanced sonar technology, they recorded images that appeared to reveal organized structures beneath the seabed, including large, stone-like formations resembling pyramids and circular layouts. Large, roughly rectangular stone blocks were discovered arranged in a straight line, stretching for about half a mile. This finding sparked years of debate, with some researchers suggesting it could be the remains of a long-lost civilization. The area covered roughly 2 square kilometers, leading to early suggestions that the remains of an ancient city could lie underwater at a depth of around 650 meters below sea level. Some early interpretations even estimated that these structures could be more than 6,000 years old, potentially older than the Egyptian pyramids, which would significantly challenge established ideas about early human development and history. Despite how fascinating these findings appear, many details remain uncertain because no large-scale follow-up research has taken place. In 2001, researchers revisited the site using improved equipment and obtained clearer sonar images. However, later planned expeditions never went ahead, mainly due to political complications and limited funding. As noted by oceanographer Sylvia Earle, an exploratory mission was cancelled due to funding issues. Some scientists remain deeply skeptical about the idea that this represents an ancient city. Geologist Manuel Iturralde Vinon raised concerns, pointing out that while the sonar shapes are unusual, there is no definitive proof that they were created by humans. He cautioned that natural geological processes can sometimes produce formations that misleadingly resemble artificial structures, even to trained experts. Similarly, Michael Fort from Florida State University questioned both the depth and context of the findings, arguing that they do not clearly align with what is currently known about early civilizations in the Caribbean region. On the other hand, some researchers argue that the formations may represent something more than natural geology. Iturralde himself also emphasized caution in the opposite direction, explaining that if an entire city had been submerged due to an earthquake, it would be unlikely to remain so clearly structured and well-defined over time. However, Weinswijk maintained a different perspective, suggesting that the sonar images show strong patterns and organization that are difficult to fully explain through natural processes alone. The scientific community remains divided, with no final agreement reached. Some supporters of the sunken city theory argue that the lack of further exploration may be due to deliberate avoidance of the subject, possibly influenced by a desire to protect established historical narratives. These views are also widely shared across online platforms, where many people believe a major discovery may be being overlooked or ignored. The case of Cuba's underwater structures is often compared to other mysterious archaeological sites, such as the Yonaguni Monument near Japan. Both locations continue to fuel debate because of their potential historical significance and unanswered questions. As geologist Iturralde carefully summarized the situation, what looks human is not always human. What do you think about the Cuba Underwater Pyramid discovery? Could further research uncover something meaningful or endangering to the world at large? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for following this discovery on Cuba's underwater pyramids. If this discovery changes how you see the Cuba Underwater Pyramids and the scientists behind the discovery, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more discoveries. See you there.